Morning, everyone. Hope people got some rest after a very full day yesterday. We're going to take the opportunity, most of you in the room, not everybody, I see Johan, most of you are from the European region. Johan's from China, or working in China for a long time. But so most of the focus of your discussions, of course, our discussions, is on the European context. And it's really wonderful to get the Spanish and the European community together. We in UNEP, like your organizations, we're still learning in the post-COVID period about when we get together. The limit, you can do a lot virtually, but I think we all agree that actually the ability to get together now and then in terms of building up, getting to the finer aspects of the topics we're discussing, and also I think in terms of the ability to network, get to know your community is really, really valuable. Now, Europe, as we all know, is a region where sustainable finance is moving very, very quickly today. And I think most would say in Europe you have the consumers, you have companies, clients, investors, even regulators now very much on board. And so there's many pressure points which makes it easier or there's little choice for most actors to move in this direction, which is certainly has many positives to it. I think one of the only questions is how to move fast enough, and maybe to some extent of not tripping over each other in terms of how do we get it right. And we do see some aspects of pushback, but overall the momentum is in a very forward direction. Now, sometimes we don't also appreciate there's a lot going on around the world. This is a global agenda, although it's context specific. I think of Brazil, where for many years we've been working with a very strong membership, both in banking and in insurance. And I know on the investment side as well. This is not a new agenda in Brazil. Same in China, and same in most other regions. So I think what we need to really do is sort of appreciate what we can learn across regions, and of course develop opportunities and see what are we doing, what sort of products and services, what are the opportunities to actually take what we're learning and expand into other markets and regions. So I'm really pleased to have three speakers who I know very well because they are all members of UNEP-FI's Global Steering Committee. And they come mostly from the insurance industry, but also working on the investment side and also a history in banking as well. Let me introduce them, and then we're going to go into some rounds of questions, and then we have time. I think we're going to open up to a wider discussion. So I think the overall, as we know, the notion of the SDGs, conceptually as a compass, it's quite useful. Trying to land it can be challenging, and there's a lot of contextual specific issues. So we want to talk a little bit about how, from what we've been learning in Europe, what does this mean for activities in other regions, and are we speaking the same language? So in terms of my fellow panelists, we have Patty Karuaihe-Martin, who is the Manager Director of Namibian Reinsurance, NamibRe. And she's Managing Director, and she's also Vice President of the African Insurance Organization. She has 30 years of experience in finance, accounting, insurance, and reinsurance. And she's co-chair of the Global Steering Committee of UNEP-FI. We have Vincent Damas, and he's Group Head of CSR at CNP Assurance, which is a leading life insurance company. He's also a member of the GSC. He represents European insurers, and he also represents CNP Assurance on the Net Zero Asset Owner Alliance that we co-convene with the PRI. Before working at CNP, he's held other senior positions, and he actually comes from the French Insurance Supervisory Authority, so has a regulatory perspective. Ivani Benazzi de Andrade is the Sustainability Superintendent at Bradesco Seguros. This is the largest insurance company in Brazil and Latin America. And it's also part of the Bradesco group, which is one of the largest banking groups. And Ivani has worked in all banking, insurance, and investment functions across the organization. And is now a member of the Commissions of Sustainability at the National Insurance Confederation, CNSIG. So we have a strong insurance and investment perspective on these discussions, but of course I think it bleeds into the wider discussions around sustainable finance in many ways. So we're going to talk about, to lead off, what do you see as the biggest challenges in mobilizing sustainable finance globally? And how does, in terms of interpretations of notions of the SDGs, ESG and otherwise, how do you see these challenges differing in the region? So Europe, Africa, Latin America. We can set off with that. Just in terms of the framing some of you are seeing in the news, very bad news coming out of Libya these days, where a climate event has led to a terrible destruction. And I think it poses the issue around both understanding and climatic change, but also building resilience. And here we're seeing, as was discussed yesterday, the storm came through Greece, did quite a bit of damage, but loss of life was fairly limited. And then it arrived in a country that is in a very broken down state, if we can say, and we see the damage that has been done, which is terrible. So I think it comes back to our community as to say, what can we be doing in terms of, from the resilience side, in terms of investment, what can we be doing to help get different parts of the world ready for a changing climate? And if we don't do so, we're starting to see what will start happening around us. So maybe I can lead off with that open, challenging question with Patty. What are your views from Namibia, from the Southern African region?
Thank you so much, Eric, for the question. So yes, we are indeed facing challenging times, and I'm here to share with you from an African perspective as to how we're seeing the global challenges and how we can collaborate and work together. So firstly, I would like to say, obviously, there is definitely going to be important considerations that can always be improved to enhance harmonization and collaboration. And the most important being harmonized standards in particular with regulation. So harmonized regulations are absolutely important. And as one of the challenges in global sustainable finance is the lack of harmonized regulation, especially from an African perspective, where we currently our regulators are also coming together to start looking into harmonizing the regulations. Now, a standardized set of rules across the global would be ideal to make it easier for countries to collaborate. So investors and stakeholders would know what to expect irrespective of the region. And obviously when they are investing in a specific country, it will be easier if we have harmonized standards. So the issue of harmonized regulation is also underpinned by the issue of data and transparency that haunts us every step of the way. And I listened yesterday, there was a session on how the Global South is behind in terms of data, the availability of data, and we all know that in order to make decisions, we need data. So investors and stakeholders require clear, verifiable data to make informed decisions. And the absence of standardized metrics and reporting frameworks can muddy the waters, making it difficult to assess the true impact of sustainable investments. Now, Eric has asked the question as to how do you see these challenges differ in our regions from an African perspective, and how can the European FIs come together or contribute to global developments? If you take Africa, we are quite a big continent. We consist of 54 or 55 countries. So, which means there's quite a wide perspectives and different regulations in all the different countries. But however, it is possible for us to harmonize and to start working together. Now, in recent months, we have seen the launch of the International Sustainable Standards Board that's been launched recently in June. And that obviously will lead to us implementing more sustainable frameworks, and obviously more harmonized regulation will come with it. So what I want to mention from the African perspective, what we have started doing, we use our different bodies, such as the African Insurance Organization, as well as the Organization for Eastern and Southern Africa, to collaborate and come together and finding sustainable ways of how we can look into specific sustainable finance. As of recent, we have also started an initiative with the African Development Bank, where we're looking into, which we have launched at the recent Africa Summit, which will be called a CRIFA. Now, this will be the Africa Climate Risk Insurance Facility for Adaptation, where we are looking at how the insurance sector comes together and find sustainable solutions, or in order to develop products that will obviously serve our customers' needs.
Thanks very much, Patty. And I think this facility that you're talking about, it brings up the topic of the term in the climate community is loss and damage, and the notion and the example I give for Libya. Developing countries for a long time have been calling for some sort of financial instrument to assist them in responding to crises, climate-induced. And many would say the most important outcome of COP27 was agreement to establish a loss and damage fund. So that fund is in the form of creation. We don't exactly know what form it's going to take. It's going to be largely capitalized by public resources. There's the question of maybe using parametric insurance, so some ability to quickly disperse in times of natural disasters. What sort of learning, because there have been other facilities, smaller, that have been operated, and I think there's a lot of learning from that. From the Namibian perspective, one of the key questions we have within UNEP is what role for commercial insurance to aid? Obviously, the first layer of capital is going to have to come probably from the public sector, but unless the private sector is backing it up in some way, we see the limitations. So what sort of learning is there in terms of how these facilities can be made most operational?
Thank you so much for that question. We have already, since last year, started to look specifically into how we can address, as the insurance sector, we have realized that the private sector is key, and we need to play a specific role in, we cannot just wait for our governments to do something. So we have specifically started to focus on how can we address loss and damage, and we have at the last COP in COP27, we have specifically started as the insurance sector form the body where we specifically focusing on, if you take the African perspective, you will all agree with me, most African countries are relying on agriculture as a way of the GDP. Between 20 and 30% of the GDP comes from agriculture. So, we then specifically focusing on most of the insurance and reinsurance sectors, we are focusing on how we can together form this facility where we will then come together and make sure that we address the needs of specifically the agricultural sector through a loss and damage fund that we will then be working on with the development banks, such as the African Development Bank.
Great. Okay, thanks. Patty, we might come back, I think, to this question, and we might have some questions from the audience around that. Actually, within UNEP, we have two people within our PSI team who've been seconded to help with the establishment at the Climate Secretariat towards the establishment of this fund, and essentially their responsibility is to be getting inputs from the PSI membership to figure out where is their learning and how can we figure out a facility that can be most functional. As I think we have to understand, these are also political processes, so they're not completely straightforward, but there's high expectations about what it can lead to. Vincent, I would like to come to you now. Can you tell us what has been your experience? CNG, a major insurer in France, but operating globally, also as an investor. In terms of the notion of the SDGs and what sort of incentives you see have been best able to align the operation with essentially SDG outcomes. What's been your learning, and what do you see in terms of the regulatory front in Europe? How is that playing in that space?
Thanks, Eric, and thanks for the invitation. So first, I would like to say that out of the 17 SDGs, some are more easily investable than others. So renewable energy, climate mitigation, as we discussed yesterday, is easier to finance because there are, let's say, bankable projects. On other topics, it's less easy to find projects which can be invested. So we need to maybe think about ways to create projects that can be financeable by investors. And then the second difficulty is that the lack of financial resources globally to allocate it to financing SDGs. So we all know that even in developed countries, we have financial resources markets, but they are not allocated correctly. So that's one of the roles of the taxonomy, EU taxonomy, to progressively allocate funds towards, let's say, environmentally sustainable activities. But here again, this taxonomy is just around environmental issues, not social issues. So we miss a big part of the SDGs. And there are challenges in implementing this taxonomy. So we are still struggling to find data to compute this. And when, for example, we have a huge subsidiary in Brazil, where we would like to support local environmental sustainable activities, but we are not sure that funding something outside EU should be considered as aligned with the taxonomy because there are various criteria like minimum social safeguards, etc. So it's not that easy to, even in a European group, to implement this taxonomy. And the last challenge I would mention is the retail investors, because we propose retail savings products to our customers. And we see that there is still a minority of our customers who want to invest in sustainable funds. So we try to, let's say, explain them what is the goal of this, that it's not just pure philanthropy, but it's also an investment which bears returns, but there is a long way to drive attraction from customers, retail customers, towards financing SDGs.
And what, Vincent, you're also a very active member of the Asset Owner Alliance. That's your Asset Owner Alliance. What's your been experience there? Now, in terms of the notion of setting a very specific objective and then to some extent having to fill in the blanks about how you do it and work with peer organizations around that. When, from an AOA perspective, when you start to look at new geographies, how, in terms of the data challenges that have been raised, or what sort of challenges, lacking transition plans, or what are the types of things that you're confronted with as you try to roll out such a strategy within the organization?
So first, the NZOA is very useful for us as a collaborative platform between asset owners. So we all face the same challenges. We discuss methodologies, lack of data. We have interactions with asset managers because we delegate a lot of our investment to asset managers to ask them to, let's say, be more engaged in the dialogue with investing companies. We, within the NZOA, there also a call for policymakers to support blended finance, so it's very useful. It's more powerful when a group like COA has this and when it's individual members. And the challenges internally is that, I would say, the lack of internal resources, internal competences on this. So, of course, we try to expand the teams and to train them. but it's a real challenges. And for example, we have a commitment to reach 30 billion euros of climate solution investment by 2025. Most of this will be done in Europe because there is a, let's say, a green bond market which is well developed and established. In Brazil, it's less the case, so it's difficult for us to do the same thing in all our geographies.
And in terms of the ISSB coming in, what potential do you see for addressing some of the data challenges in terms of, as Patty mentioned, do you think this is going to be decision useful quickly, or do we have a long process ahead?
I hope it will be implemented quickly, maybe turned into regulations by various countries. So any data improvement will be welcome to help us as investors, as global investors, to get more data to allocate our funds correctly. So I hope it will be useful.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Vincent. Let me come to Ivani. Ivani, how do you see the notion of SDGs and how it's being applied in Brazil, Latin America? I mentioned that there's a long history in Brazil, particularly. What's happening today in terms of the interplay as we have in Europe between regulators and voluntary action? How's it playing out in your market?
Thank you, Eric, for the invitation, for the question. When you talk about the regulations in Brazil, we are involving a lot in regulations in Brazil, especially when you talk about in SDGs, for example. We are an example important is associated with the financial of the SDGs in Brazil is concerning the expansion of microinsurance and the inclusive insurance by insurance company, supported by our regulator, SUSEP, which in 2022, the regulator revisited the guidelines for microinsurance, also expanded it to micro-entrepreneurs and the small business. For our reality in Brazil is very important because we are a developing country, and the micro-entrepreneurs and the small companies represent 30% the total companies in Brazil, in our economy. Is very important activity when our regulator revised these guidelines. Other important change in regulation is very recently demonstrated, in my opinion, important events, especially in regulatory terms, favor the sustainability investment. The SUSEP rule, the number is not so good, in my opinion, it's 666. The number is strange, but it's very important, which sets out the sustainability required to be observed by insurers in positions the Brazilian insurance market on the SDG agenda, because the other sectors in Brazil are involved in this agenda. Nowadays, with this regulation, insurance companies are involved a lot in this agenda in line with the international frameworks. It's important to mention that this regulation was a joint effort between insurance companies and the regulator. We have a lot of meetings with the regulator until the regulator to show this rule in the market. It's very important to demonstrate for the marketing. In the SDG regulations of Brazil insurance sector, it's possible to identify a major influence of the recommendations of the TCFD. It's very important, according to the international recommendations. when the financial and insurance sector involving on the agenda is very important, because the other sectors seem to follow them. And because this, we are very optimistic with the market in this question.
Thank you, Ivani. Your country is one that has gone through a fairly political bit of a roller coaster recently. You're not the only region that has. My sense of understanding, and tell me if I'm wrong, is that the market actors and regulators were able to maintain stability even as politics was maybe going in a different direction. Now you have a new government. The environment was quite politicized, at least in the previous administration. How are things now with the Lula administration? What are your expectations there? Because you've mentioned a very good relationship between leaders in the market and the regulators. We hear the good news about the reduction in deforestation in the Amazon. What are your expectations now with the new government? And do you have any suggestions? Because there are other regions where this is happening as well, the politicization of the ESG, net zero. It's definitely a concern to our community. From the Brazilian context, any learnings and expectations with the current government?
Yes, the expectation now about the environment, the SDG, is good. In specific case of Brazil, when you talk about Brazil, which is a continental country, a developed country, with many opportunities in SDG, but also with social and the economic gaps. We have gaps. But it's made a lot of progress. I told him about the regulatory. Now we have environmental minister Marina Silva in the power. In the Lula, our president, power her in these questions. And in 2 weeks, we will have an important event in Brazil. We have in 2 weeks other events in Brazil about the environment. We are very optimistic about the taxonomy in Brazil, but we have gaps, social gaps, but I believe that we have a potential to develop the green economy in Brazil, especially because Amazon and the other biomes.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's shift the discussion. Unfortunately, the macroeconomic environment, besides the political environment, the macroeconomic environment has seriously deteriorated, particularly in emerging markets, developing countries. There's a lot of calls for reform of the international financial architecture, and within the G20 statement that just came out from Delhi, call to reform the World Bank. What are your views in terms of the potential and the realities of such reform? Because you've been working with the International Financial Corporation, the other development banks, the IDB. I think we have to understand the limitations in terms of the capital that's made available, but also the form of the capital, the form of risk sharing, the form of blending that's coming. In terms of the agendas that we're working on within Europe, cost of capital it's gone up, but nothing like it's gone up in Southern Africa or even in Brazil. So what do you have views in terms of the potential for international financial reform? Should we hold out hope, and what sort of reform do you think is actually needed to better enable the private sector to play its best value-added role? Patty or Ivani, would you like to take that? And then I come to Vincent.
Yes, you have just mentioned it that the geopolitics is playing a role, and that inflation is going up, and the cost of living is definitely increasing. So yes, our communities are challenged with different many variables. So the question is that what are we doing in terms of reforms to make it better for, obviously, in Africa, we have the challenge of the protection gap, the insurance protection gap, where we would like, as an insurance sector, you are most probably all aware that we currently, the insurance penetration is only 3%. So of which, and if you take out South Africa, the rest of South Africa and Namibia top the list. But if you take out, you will find that the rest of Africa makes only 2%. So obviously, as an insurance sector, we want to play a pivotal role in making sure that more communities are insured. But because of all these challenges that we are competing with, it makes it even more challenging. So yes, I think reforms will have to start taking place from the financial sector. We will have to form partnerships. We will have to collaborate more in order to make sure that whatever we're coming up with is it's impacting the region positively and not just a specific community.
Great, thanks very much, Patty. Ivani?
Yes, in Brazil, inflation is stable. And now, probably you have opportunity to attract more investments in the future. In the future, in the recent, probably this year, we have conditions to attract investments for in SDG investments, but other investments, because we have opportunities, especially in matrix energy metrics, in different possibilities, and I told him about the gaps, but the next year we have a good possibility to the country to be more stable. This year, the next semester more stable, and in the next year, not a big growth, the GDP, but more stable. It's for the sustainability is good, because less when the country more stable, it's better for this question to discussion. We are nowadays talking about a new regulatory mark in Brazil about the taxes. It's very important for Brazil. It's a long time you are trying to negotiate this in Congress. Probably this year we finish this. It's very important to stable the country. It's these questions, and it probably will reduce capital cost to the country.
Okay. Vincent, President Macron is one of the biggest proponents of reforming the international architecture. He had his summit in Paris in the spring. Big expectations. Is French investors, French business, are they involved, do you feel, or is this really something that's taking place in a different orbit and it's very disconnected from the capital markets?
So it's mainly a discussion between governments, but we were involved in the preparation of this summit in June. So the French financial community, the French government wanted to know the challenges we faced in not investing in developing countries to finance SDGs or climate mitigation adaptation. So they are conscious of the problems. I think the French financial institutions, are committed to developing goals, financing developing goals. So we are waiting for the right incentives or mechanism, be it blended finance or whatever. One of the good way forward, I think, is the debt relief instruments we have seen. So, for example, debt to nature swap, where, for example, the US has relieved the debt of Peru to support Amazon conservation. So it's still small amounts, but I guess there are possible, yes, these kind of instruments can be useful. And coming back to the insurance sector that Petty mentioned, I guess we also can imagine lots of things on this, like public-private partnerships in developing countries. So, because the commercial insurance market cannot insure every climate-related perils, some are too big to be insured or reinsured by private sectors. So, in France, we have a plan where the French state is the ultimate reinsurer of climate-related perils. We can provide technical assistance to developing countries to implement this, to have a more resilient economic thanks to insurance protection.
Certainly, within the development finance community, the head of the French Development Agency, the AFD, NamibRe, is a real leader, I think, in this space, and he's been doing a lot to bring together the other public, bilateral, and national development banks together. But the challenges are, I think, large, and I think it's very important that the private sector is actually at the table in terms of actually discussing. And I think definitely we all know the limitations in terms of the public purse. So the question is obviously how they can be to best put advantage. And at the end of the day, if we look, unfortunately, once again, to the Libya example, having institutions in place in terms of, investment in rule of law and governance and institutions, obviously, typically the private sector will say that's the starting point. We get to risk sharing and blending once we've done the basics to the extent that we can, although one will never completely replace the other. Okay, so we have a little bit of time. I would like to open the floor to this wider discussion. I think that it would be good for you to raise questions around the notion, what role for Europe, European leaders, what you're doing to be solving some of these or partnering on some of these challenges. We have different markets, things are moving at different speeds. There's a lot of learning and sharing to be done, but there's also a lot of need for working together. And I guess the question is how best can we do that? So if there's anyone who would like to put out some questions. Okay, we have one here and then one at the back. So why don't we take first two? Please, if you could introduce yourself. And then...
Oh, I'm Laura Blanco. I'm responsible for sustainability at the Wealth Management and Insurance Division at Santander. Thank you very much, everyone. It was very interesting to hear about insurance. I have a question about insurance products that are not related to savings or investments, that are just regular insurance products that we use in our daily lives. And what is your approach to come up with products that can be sustainable in that space that I just mentioned? I know Ivani mentioned the micro entrepreneurs and the micro insurance, but how about other types of products? I mean, that are not just environmentally related, and what kind of approach are you using? Because there is a lack of frameworks out there. The only thing that is available is the PSI, and they are just too high level. And it's very difficult to operationalize those when you're thinking, okay, I want to increase my product offering and in the ESG space.
Okay, very good question. Maybe we have a second question at the back here, so we can take that as well, and then we'll come back. And I think as was discussed also yesterday, generally insurance has been doing a lot, but particularly on climate and other areas, insurance houses on the investment side, typically they've been ahead of the insurance, and largely often it's because of a lack of agreed frameworks. I think there has been some progress, But let's come to the panelists in a moment on that. Second question.
Yes, good morning. Burçak İnel from the European Banking Federation. My question is about the transparency of the financing of the development finance institutions. In particular, we have in Europe quite a few of them. I'd like to know your views, the panel's views on how that is evolving in the world and in particular in Europe. Are they following something close to the transparency of that is expected of the private financiers? Are they very, very different standards? Because there's a certain movement pressure coming from different stakeholders who want to know what exactly the money is being used for. Thank you.
Great. Okay, thank you. Two different questions, but let's see if we can come at them. Anyone want to take the first one in terms of insurance products for ESG? Ivani?
Okay. In my company, I'll talk more about my company in Brazil. My company is Bradesco Seguros. We are a multi-line company. It's difficult to provide product services about ESG. It's a challenge. We have microinsurance and the products for social class. But when you think about insurance for environmental, is more difficult because we don't have specific data to analyze data to specify, I don't know, it's correct, to analyze, to offer this kind of product is more, we have more difficult. But we try to give for our clients some assistance, special in assistance, to provide assistance in regions when you have some catastrophes in the regions. We try offer assistance, no specific products. For example, we considering ESG products, for example, when you have telemedicine, for example, for health, we have a big country, for example, we intensive the help for our clients use this telemedicine. You can arrive in different parts of the country with these services. And in Brazil, it has a local, it's impossible to arrive, it has hospitals, and you use the telemedicine for this. It's one example, the possibility, they use the ESG product, the services. When you offer insurance health with a low price, it's in different regions of Brazil. We have different insurances for different kinds of companies. For example, we have the same products with different prices according the size, the interest of the company. For example, we have the same product to offer health, but with less services. It's some possibilities we try to work the SDGs. But if you have, we have more in our website. It's www.bradescoseguros.com.br. We have a lot of kinds of services about SDG product services.
One of the new areas that PSI is working on is life and health. Who of you does life and health? You do. Do you do?
Yeah.
And do you see the potential for products in that space?
Yes.
But it's still early days, is it?
In PSI?
Yeah, no, in terms of in the life and health space, coming up with ESG specific types of insurance or pricing associated with is that still very early days or?
Yes, we have a space to come in this direction, but we have some difficulties in health because the rules, especially rules in Brazil, has some specifications it's difficult to advance in this. But the telemedicine is good to evolve in this approach in Brazil, in health. But in the other steps is more difficult because the models, the health in Brazil. But telemedicine, it's possible to advance.
Okay, interesting. Vincent?
Yes, maybe so in my company, we have two approaches to integrate ESG into insurance. So it's challenging. One is to incentivize customers to have a more sustainable approach. For example, we have discount on electric vehicle insurance. We incentivize customers to accept recycled parts when we repair their car instead of brand new to improve circularity. So that's let's say limited so far. And the second approach is to reduce the protection gap that Patty was mentioning. So to cover populations that we would not accept. So for example, we try to reduce the health questionnaire that we ask before insuring someone. So it's a challenge because insurance companies want to know the risk and to price them before accepting. But for example, in France, there is a law that forbids health questionnaire for term creditor insurance below 200,000 euros. So no, even if you have a cancer or anything, you are not asked to declare it to the insurance company. That's a way to protect people that would not be accepted otherwise. And coming back to the climate-related perils, one challenge is to, for example, in France, we have some regions which are more subject to floods. So how do we keep insuring these regions and not exclude them or increase price, which would make insurance unavailable for these people? So how can we pool risk at the national level? So that's one of the challenging we are.
Do you have a mutualization structure? Do you not?
Yes. But any insurance can decide to segment its pricing. So we could say that in the southeast of France, it's 10 times more expensive than in Paris because they are more exposed to catastrophe.
Right. Vincent, let me come to the second question. You say a green bond purchase program. Do you purchase from, for instance, the World Bank Group or EIB? And do you get to the question, do you get the transparency you're looking for in terms of comparability?
So yes, we invest in green bonds from private companies, from governments, from supranational issuers. So, but in terms of measurement of impacts and let's say transparency, I have to say that we still have less transparency from public issuers compared to private companies. But that's still the early days of this market. So we are continuing to learn and to discuss with issuers so to get the right data we need and to harmonize them because that's still not harmonized or in PDF format.
Yeah, no, within UNEP-FI, our experience, it's a very good question. Within the development bank community, there's a huge amount of sharing and there's a lot of knowledge. I think it's quite distinct from the private sector where we're also getting a lot of learning. Now, development banks, particularly in emerging markets, development countries, put safeguards on, so they have a lot of expectations of their counterparties. So they're asking for a lot of information. But I think here, of course, the question is, who's asking them for the information? And certainly, green bond markets is one way to be pushing for the transparency. I think we do need to work more at bringing the two communities together. The EIB, an example, we very much like their PATH framework, for those who are not familiar, who will start to put expectations on counterparties around transition planning. And eventually, saying that they will eventually not deal with clients unless they have transition plans in place. I think that's quite a useful way in terms of the influence they have on their clients, which could be commercial banks, it could be insurers as well. But there is a real challenge about methodologies, because if you have let's say, take a bank who's applying the PRB, and then they go to work with the EIB, and the EIB is asking them for something about transition planning, but which is totally different than what they're doing either in NESBA or the PRB. We're talking about the same topic, but using different methodologies. It's going to be quite frustrating. So how can we work together to bring together this commonality? I think the private sector has been doing a pretty good job of setting common protocols, languages, methodologies. The public sector is doing it to some extent. We need to get the two groups together and talking. And maybe, Patty, from your perspective as a reinsurer in Namibia, how do you see the relationship with the international financial institutions? Because obviously you would do that a lot. In terms of ESG or climate type factors, are you speaking the same language?
Yes, I think internationally we definitely should be speaking the same language. From an African perspective, we are picking up on the ESG, what needs to happen within our local content. Like specifically in my company, we, on the question that was asked about a specific product, we are looking at developing a product for, like I've mentioned, agriculture is key for the African communities. So we are, together with our government, teaming up and also with donors and working on developing a parametric insurance product for a risk transfer solution for small-scale farmers. So we are definitely, and I can also say it on my co-reinsurers, most of them are also working specifically on specific programs on insurance in agricultural sector. So yes, the ESG, we don't have specific frameworks or standards set as we speak compared to what Eric is asking, that the international community is much further ahead. And that's why I think the question today would be that how we are a global village, and if climate and many other, the impact is global. So we need to work together. We need to see how we can collaborate more and learn. And I know there's a lot of frameworks, there's a lot of, if we look at all what's happening, I think from an African perspective, it will be good to see how the connections can be made in order for us we do come together as an African nation, and we, through our associations, we are trying to collaborate and make sure that we form partnerships so that we all move in the same direction. And I think the global North will definitely have to come on board in whatever we are deciding to do. So yes, we are also working with, like I've mentioned earlier, with our development banks to see how we can find solutions, obviously African solutions that will impact positively on our communities.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Patty. We're coming to the end of the session. If I can sort of sum up what we've heard. One, it all starts, we understand we have data gaps, but a lot of work is being done. We have the ISSB coming. We have experience from TCFD. TNFD will launch next week. Over time, we're seeing a consolidation. We expect TCFD is already being brought into the ISSB. I think we expect that to happen to TNFD over time. So there's the data challenge, and within your own markets, it's challenging. You go into other markets, even more so. So there's work to be done there. There's the issue around certainly the relationship between market actors and the regulators, and that is maturing in positive ways in most markets. There is the political realm above that, which sometimes is helping and sometimes is hindering. And I think once again, it's to the extent that the industry creates a positive momentum and a dynamic, it provides the resilience to withstand sometimes a political changing process. And we talk a lot about the notion, if you want to understand where things are going, it's many ways better to look at the science, look at the parts per million in the atmosphere, and don't pay too much attention to the politics in the short term, because political processes, well, they change over time, and eventually they are going to have to reflect the state of or respond to the state of the science. And then we have the notion of, if you have the basic rules of the game, you have the basic institutions, you have the data, you have the products and the services, then as we look into emerging markets and developing countries, there will still definitely be a need for public-private also in terms of risk sharing and capital blending, and an acknowledgement that the system we have today is not perfect. It needs to be improved, we can say. There is quite a bit of political momentum around this. President Macron and others, we have the Bridgetown initiative coming out of Mia Motley from Barbados. I think we have high hopes that we're going to see progress there, but I think also realities that there are not simple quick fixes. In the end, I think, as we heard also from the chair panel yesterday morning, the basic economics do change. Even if the science is the same, you go into new markets, the basic economic fundamentals can be different, which unfortunately can make, let's say, low carbon solutions not as viable as they might be in the home market you're operating in. So we have to be cognizant of that. We have to figure out what sort of solutions, how do we work together as a community within the banking, insurance, investment sectors, and also how do we work across lines to the regulators, to the other stakeholders. So with that, a big thank you. Thank you to the panel, and thank you for the willingness to try to cross borders, and that's what UNEP-FI is all about. Thank you very much.